Very warm welcome to all of our guests and panelists today. I have a old, long association with Nalini ma'am. She's been my headmistress at Raghubir Singh Junior Modern School, which is just right across. So it's been a very quick journey for you from school to here, ma'am. And of course, our pleasure to welcome Anuradha ji as well and Nishi ji as well. As far as the role of schools in grooming the lives of young children is concerned, that's been a point of discussion and conversation for centuries now. What is the role that schools will play and what is the role that families and parents must play? So I want to begin by understanding in today's context, and let me begin with Nalini ji, if I may. Ma'am, how are your interactions evolving with the young girls in school?
Good afternoon, everyone. And a special thanks to NewsX for arranging this amazing program, especially when we're talking about education. If I'm talking about the young girls, I'm talking about the youngest that come into the school and my interactions with them. Though, yes, I've had a career in it, being a teacher, being a principal for the last 22 years. But with the girls that I'm with now, it is a deep association because for them, you're everything. You're their mother away from home. You are the one who's going to be teaching, training, cuddling, encouraging, doing everything possible to make them happy, to make them good learners. And that's the kind of relationship you build with the young learners that come into school.
Okay, on that note, I'm also going to request everyone in the audience to just maintain a little bit of silence. I understand this is the post-lunch session, so everyone's just filled up their tummies. And of course, is going into a little bit of a siesta, but I really do request everyone to just maintain a little bit of silence. Let's try to understand and listen in what our panelists have to say. I want to take the same question with Anura. In fact, I just realized I've spoken like a true headmistress myself right now, scolding everyone to maintain silence. But Anuradha ji, same question to you, ma'am. I want to understand from your perspective, how are conversations with young girls evolving in school?
So So I run a college. It's from modern school to Sindhya Kanya to the next level, where girls are going. Actually, it's a postgraduate program, and we were talking about this just before we came on stage. That actually conversations have changed so dramatically in the last, I would say, 10 or 15 years in terms of young girls. I think it starts with conversations that mothers especially are having with their daughters, where our generation was brought up to believe, let things go, you don't have to be expressive, don't make it inconvenient. And I'm not saying it's changed for everybody across the country, but I think the first traces of young girls being encouraged to actually dream for themselves, have ambitions for themselves, not constantly put themselves last, I think those conversations have begun. And at least in our conversations with young women, it is quite evident that aspirations are changing. And I think if you look at the slogan for today, these are all an expression of changing times. And I think it's working both ways. Society's expectations of women, the government's expectations and promises for young women, but most importantly, the dreams and expectations that young women have for their own lives are actually changing quite rapidly.
All right, Nishiji, same question to you, ma'am.
So I feel that, for one thing, schools mirror the aspirations of society. And so whatever happens in society is, in a way, in a microcosm, seen in schools as well. So conversations with girls especially will change because the world is changing out there. And education has to prepare children for a future, however nebulous and vague it may be. But the thing is that the topic that you selected for today, to pass on the torch, sometimes you have to light a torch before you can pass it on. And that lighting of the torch is what it takes to be relevant in education. In my case, my students and I were looking for a project to start service in our school. And inevitably, when girls look for service, they will look for their own kind. And we ended up setting up a sanitary napkin manufacturing unit in the school. And
Wow.
that became an experiential learning project in the school itself. But I'd like to talk about 3 things that happened at that time. When we wanted to wean away underprivileged women from the unhygienic alternatives that they were using, we faced a lot of challenges from older women in the village who would look down upon us and say, इनको शर्म नहीं आती है, ऐसा काम करते हैं. It was all right for us to hear it in the village to some extent, but in my own school, my teachers were telling me, what are you trying to do? There are men in the administrative block and you've set up this machine in a room in the admin block. I thought this was perhaps something which was only limited to India, but when I made a presentation about it in an international forum in South Africa, the gentleman sitting next to me was a headmaster from Australia. And he said, you know, it's all very well, but we don't have this kind of a gender bias in our country. Soon thereafter, a lady walked up to me and said, I'd like to know more about this project that you do. So I said, sure, sit down, let's talk about it. Or I have another session coming up, we'll talk about it. And she said, no, we'll wait till the men go away. And
Right.
she turned out to be the teacher from the same school where this gentleman was sitting. So it's not something which is endemic only to our country, only to a village, only to a school. It is much more widespread. And therefore, as the motto of my school says, Tamso ma jyotirgamaya. One has to light the torch and then pass it on.
Excellent. And I've asked about conversations with young girls, but it's also important to understand conversations, how are they evolving with our boys. So, Nalini ma'am, I'll start with you. I want to understand how are those conversations evolving, because at the end of the day, one has to accept that there is a lot of exposure. There is access to the internet, and the internet is flooded with all sorts of information. The internet is flooded with all sorts of access to, material that really portrays women in a sexual manner, objectification. So a lot of times young boys are exposed to all of that at an age and stage where they perhaps don't even understand what it is and how to really go about it. So how does that conversation happen,
I
ma'am?
think you're absolutely right. And that is exactly what happens now at school. The children are growing up much, much quicker than you would anticipate and what we had seen in years. These days you'll find boys in whispers at times and maybe in a more hidden manner, but discussing things you wouldn't have imagined earlier. Say a discussion down at the cricket field, you're supposed to be coaching and learning more about the sport, but it's like, oh, I've got something to show you, and I've brought my phone, or can I tell you after school? So yes, there are, but at the same time, you have to understand there's more exposure, like what you just said. And if that has to be treated very responsibly. So it comes down to the fact that it's all about education. And if I can help the young parent at home to understand, then I can help the child at school to understand that it's okay. It's okay when you discuss, it's okay to understand, and to make sure that you do it responsibly. Because I'm very happy to share now, especially in Delhi, I'm not so sure about all the parts of the country, but we do have a more gender equality in the numbers in school. You have more girls in school now than maybe even 12 years ago. Wow. And that is maybe by what you had started the program by saying, Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. तो जी हाँ, बेटी पढ़ रही है, स्कूल आ रही है, लेकिन उस बेटी को उसका स्थान देने में अभी समय है. And that has to come about by the awareness. And it is those young boys, even through their conversations, that are somewhere going to be responsible for making that difference. It is the teachers as well. And you will all agree that teachers at school are usually ladies.
Yes.
They have very few men. So their coaches, maybe their sports coaches, or their music teacher may be a gentleman, but otherwise they are with their teachers. And at times they may feel apprehensive to approach the teacher and share those conversations otherwise. But yes, teachers are wiser, so they do come to know, and that's where they encourage them and maybe try to understand what is that particular idea floating in the minds of those young learners that needs to be touched upon and maybe treated more responsibly. That's going to help them because it's a matter of those 14 years. It's going to all happen there. And once they've moved on from those 14 years at
Yes.
school, they've established themselves, they've got an identity. So if I don't help that identity to grow in the right manner, maybe I'm not fulfilling my responsibility.
Okay.
So that's how it is at school.
Nishiji, I want to understand from your perspective as well, ma'am. As far as conversations with boys in our schools is now concerned, how are you going about it and what are your suggestions and thoughts? How must teachers and principals really understand how to converse and what are the topics to discuss? Because sometimes you may come across certain incidents, as Nalini ma'am was also pointing out, right? That you hear in whispers on cricket fields or when they're playing, the kids are playing together and you just hear in whispers about them talking about things that may come as a shock to our systems because we don't expect them to be discussing certain matters at a certain age, but it's happening. So rather than brushing it under the carpet, how do you really deal with those sort of conversations?
So mine is an all-girls residential school. So their interactions are very limited with
Right.
the boys. However, taking on from the same project which I talked about, whenever we have inter-school events where students of other schools come to our school, we always have a session on menstrual hygiene for the boys as well and give them an opportunity to work those machines on our campus. And over a period of time, we have, I'll tell you a little incident that happened just very recently when a conclave was going on at my school, and during the free time, boys and girls were all playing football together, and a boy brought a girl who was obviously in a lot of distress to the sick room, to the infirmary, and told the RMO, this girl has her periods and she needs a sanitary napkin and she needs a hot water bag. Please take care of her. I'm going back to my game. So if it can be a hopeful story, this is what we should be aspiring to. And I think the more we tell these stories, the easier it will become for the rest of society to change as well.
Anuradhaji, since you deal with a slightly older lot, as far as, then navigating those changes is concerned, because then you come into, of course, people wanting to explore relationships, and then there's boyfriends and girlfriends, and all of those concepts also come in with age. So how do you go about having those conversations with girls as well as boys?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think it's a fascinating time in the world, and I think we are all navigating it together. And I'm hearing the other two panelists, and it's what they start off. We see, when by the time girls come to us, they are sort of in their 20s, and how these changes are impacting them. I think where we stand, a lot of the work that we have to do is about creating a world where men and women coexist. And so how do you see, this is not about, the programs called We Women Want, but it's in a world where both sides coexist, and you're talking about a better balance. It's not about one group of people versus the other. A lot of the conversations we have are trying to make sure that the conversations never become a world where it is one versus the other. And our conversation or our motto has always been that patriarchy, the way it has manifested itself in the world, is as damaging for women as it is for men. And you know, taking on from what Nishi was saying about making all kinds of things in the world normal for both men and women to talk about, we are seeing in the 20s and in the 30s, there is a growing number of men who want to be a primary parent, who want to be there for their families, and there is a growing number of women who want to be in the workplace. So I think the moment both men and women are able to look at how both segments will be better off if patriarchy was broken down from its current form, that's the conversation that is becoming quite central in the 20s.
Very interesting. Anuradhaji, I want to understand also from your perspective, a lot of conversation today, at least online, is suddenly about how women, ever since they've entered the workforce, or say because of the feminist movement, what's happened today is that women are taking on more of the burden than before, and men are perhaps not helping out as much as women thought they would. Because, for example, earlier it was very clear in a lot of sense, in a way, right, that women would be taking care of the household, the man would go earn money and come back. But today women are also somewhere feeling a little bit of burnout in the sense that, okay, I have to go out to work, but I also am waking up. I'm still waking up early morning to prepare the meal for the rest of the family, to come back and prepare the meal for the rest of the family, and I'm also working. How do you address some of these concepts or conversations with young women? How do they maneuver this?
Yeah, it's interesting you asked the question. So the curriculum that we offer in our program, of course, it's a management program. So we teach women. I think the core of what we want to do is create conversations where women feel the importance of financial independence. You know, starting from being 5, 6, 7-year-old girls, how do you envisage their role in the world at 25, 26, 27? So somewhere we believe that without financial independence, even the Beti Padhao, Beti Bachao, if education doesn't translate into financial independence or what we call empowerment, I think the story remains very incomplete. If you have to talk about financial independence and, you know, them being out in the world, the understanding or some of the conventional thinking today is that the roles and responsibilities in the home have to be shared if women are out in the workforce.
Yes.
So the group that you're talking about, you know, there are certain strata of society where that's an absolute reality. That women especially if you look at sort of the underprivileged parts of society, they are going out and working outside, and they are
Working within the house
Yeah,
as well.
working within the house. I think urban educated women is a big challenge because they have the option.
Right.
So if they can't cope with the burden of both, they just drop out. So the challenge that we are seeing is that in the last 10, 15 years, the participation of women in the workforce from urban educated women has actually dropped.
Wow. Okay.
It's gone from over 30% to, you know, below 20%. And that's very shocking that you're more educated and less employed.
Right.
And the reason there is, and again, it's in other parts of the world, it's also in India, girls are marrying later, they're not having children. And I don't think it's an answer. I mean, I've been on the show with Priya, with Vedika scholars. The answer is not a rejection of motherhood or marriage. I think girls are questioning the current norms, that if this is the structure, then they are not participating. So a lot of the young women we have on our programs are today saying that marriage is not the mainstay. They are not
Right.
waiting to get married. Many of them are saying they're not sure that they want to have children because it's their first sign of independence, and if it's not shared responsibility, then they won't take it.
Okay. Nalini ji, yes.
If I can add to that, it's not just about being independent, it's also about having a sense of identity.
Yes.
And the girls are realizing that, and especially the young women. We have one with us on our panel, and it's good to see that. If I have a sense of identity, I'd like to establish that and feel equally respected compared to my, fellow counterparts.
And interesting you raised that, because that was going to be my next question, that how can schools today then instill a renewed sense of self and independence amongst the younger lot?
Okay. Yes, that happens all the time. So you do have to understand that, if you don't season them towards that at this younger age, they're never going to go that way, right? So yes, in school there were times when you'd say, oh, football, that's a game for boys.
Yes.
Girls don't play football. And today, yes, we do. And they learn to do that. There were a lot of games otherwise traditionally that I could play outside school with boys. But when I got educated, it's like, oh, really? Are you going to be playing those games? So that's just part of the understanding. But at the same time, when you have younger girls coming to you and saying, ma'am, can I try? Or can I go on the mountaineering expedition or on the trek or whatever with all my fellow boys that are going from the class? Or go on a trip? Somewhere they're not coming to you and saying, can I go and ask my mother if I can do that? I'd like to go because I feel I would like to do this. So that's somewhere where I'm seeing a drift, a shift, and I'm happy to see it. But at the same time, I would like to understand that is it coming from the home? Like I was just listening very carefully to what Anuradhaji was saying, and it is quite shocking to see that you have more educated women but less working women. So which identity am I looking at actually? Right? So that's, again, if you begin the right way, and I'm not saying anything against girls' schools, but yes, in the co-ed form, when the girls and the boys are together, they learn from each other. They learn to respect each other's spaces. And of course, like we heard with the program that you have at the Scindia School, which is quite remarkable, ma'am, because even at the co-ed school, when we have our counselor sessions with boys and girls, we say, okay, this is a session for boys,
yes,
and this is a session for girls. I'd like the girls to listen to this and the boys to listen to something else. So it's nice to see that, yes, we are able to achieve that, and I think I've learned that from you today as well.
Well, Nishiji, I want to understand from you, ma'am, because you're, of course, looking at an all-girls school. What is it like to bridge that gap where you're able to tell a girl that you can do whatever you want? There was a time when, as ma'am also pointed out, right, that football was only played by boys and girls would probably be sent into some other sport, or science was for boys. Of course, that's changed a lot, but we're not where we wish to be today. So how do you deal with that?
So any teacher will tell you that there is a difference between telling and teaching. You can tell people all you want, there will be no learning. But to teach, you need to give opportunities. You need to give possibilities. And on an all-girls campus, there is an opportunity for a girl to feel that I have the right of way. There is that utopian feeling of comfort and feeling that I can do whatever I want without anybody looking at me, without anybody body shaming me, without anybody there to attack me in any way. And that is such a high which once she tastes, she wants to replicate it in her later life as well. So the opportunity that she gets to be able to live in a world where she is at the top of the food chain, I think that is the biggest learning right now.
Well, top of the food chain, that's a great, of course, phrase for us to wrap up this particular conversation on. I thank once again all of our guests for joining us at this edition of the We Women Want Festival and Awards.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.